a November morning in 2005, in a quiet, tight-knit town just south of Waco. But that peace was shattered by a single 911 call. The phone rang at 6:11 a.m. On the other end, a frantic woman cried out, "My husband! He's not moving! There's blood all over the bed!" That woman was Darlene Gentry, a young nurse, mother of 3. The man lying in a pool of blood was Keith Gentry, her 31-year-old husband. To neighbors, they were the picture of a perfect family. But that morning, their warm suburban home turned into a crime scene. At first, it looked like a sudden break-in. The gun cabinet was open, several firearms were missing, but something didn't add up. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, and hidden in those small inconsistencies was the clue that led detectives to a chilling question. Was the killer really an outsider, or someone inside the house? As the investigation deepened, the truth began to surface. A life insurance policy worth nearly $750,000, a gun tossed into a pond, and a wife who later returned to secretly retrieve the very evidence she had thrown away. That 911 call marked the beginning of a tragedy. A community shaken, a family destroyed, and a nation stunned as the truth unraveled. This is the story of Darlene and Keith Gentry, a marriage once built on love and promises, but ending in betrayal, greed, and an irreversible tragedy. But to understand the events that rocked Robinson, Texas that day, we have to go back to the very woman who picked up the phone and dialed 911, Darlene Gentry. Born November 21st, 1974, Darlene was the second daughter in a devoted Central Texas family. From an early age, she stood out with her radiance and discipline. Friends and relatives remembered her as beautiful inside and out, ambitious and full of life. With her bright smile, flowing blonde hair, and natural charm, Darlene quickly became the community's golden girl. She never officially held a beauty queen title, but friends and teachers affectionately called her Miss Texas. In school, Darlene was crowned homecoming queen, marched with the drill team, and seemed to always be at the center of every event. Darlene's charm was effortless. It came from her sincerity and her positive energy, the very qualities that made her admired by colleagues, cherished by friends, and a source of pride for her family. To many, it seemed like Darlene had it all. But from that seemingly perfect beginning would later come a tragedy no one could have foreseen. Darlene entered adulthood with a bright path ahead. In 1993, she graduated from Yo High School in Cameron, then enrolled at Texas State Technical College in Waco. At first, she pursued dental studies, completing a dental assistant program, but her long-term goal was to become a nurse. It was during those college years that Darlene met the man who would change her life forever, Keith Gentry. Keith was born on September 1974 in Waco and raised in Robinson, a small town bound tightly by family and community. The son of Weeman and Glenda Gentry, Keith grew up alongside 2 sisters and a large, loving extended family who adored him. At Robinson High School, Keith was remembered for his calm, genuine, and dependable nature. He wasn't flashy, nor did he seek the spotlight. Keith simply did what needed to be done, quietly, without complaint. Like Darlene, he attended Texas State Technical College, where he studied design and welding. He soon secured a steady job as a technical assistant at a utility company, building for himself a stable, responsible future. Keith was the family man type, hardworking, grounded, and deeply committed to providing for and protecting those he loved. Even before marriage, friends and relatives already saw in him the image of a devoted husband and a future father. From the very first meeting, the chemistry between Keith and Darlene was undeniable. Love struck fast, pulling them into a whirlwind that neither could resist. Both families welcomed the relationship with open arms. To everyone around them, marriage seemed inevitable. It was only a matter of time. But beneath the sweetness, cracks were beginning to form. By 1997, With both of them graduated, Darlene was waiting for a proposal. Keith, however, wasn't ready to commit. After many difficult conversations, they were forced to make a painful choice: to break up. The news left their families and friends stunned. And for Darlene and Keith, the separation cut deep, leaving them both wounded, uncertain, and facing a future without each other. Seeking a fresh start, Darlene moved to Dallas. She threw herself into dental work, trying to adapt to the city's fast pace. But after a car theft and the crushing isolation of urban life, she realized this wasn't the life she wanted. Just a year later, Darlene returned home. And then, as if fate had intervened, she reconnected with Keith. This time, there was no hesitation. Love ignited, stronger than ever before. In 1999, Keith proposed. They quickly married, bought their first home, and began building the life they had once only dreamed of. Everything seemed to fall into place. Yet for Darlene, something still felt missing. Dentistry wasn't her true passion. She returned to school to pursue nursing, a choice Keith fully supported, proud to see his wife so determined in her new path. On the outside, they looked like the perfect couple, always laughing, sharing responsibilities, and working together toward a future they both believed in. By the early 2000s, Keith and Darlene had settled in Robinson, Texas, a quiet town just minutes from Waco. They bought a suburban home right next door to Keith's parents. At first, the closeness was comforting. Over time, though, it would spark complications. Keith held a steady job at the local utility company, while Darlene thrived as a nurse. With 2 solid incomes, they lived comfortably, raised a family, and enjoyed small luxuries along the way. In 2001, they welcomed their first son, Chase. 3 years later came Cody, and in 2005, Cade. With the support of both families, parenthood seemed to come naturally. Life looked picture perfect. A home built on love, stability, and traditional family values. They were the kind of family neighbors admired. An attractive couple, 3 healthy boys, and a tidy home that always seemed full of warmth. But behind that perfect picture, reality was far more complicated. Keith's job often kept him away, leaving Darlene to juggle work and the chaos of raising 3 boys alone. Even when he was home, Keith was exhausted, seeking rest rather than diving into the whirlwind of fatherhood. Realizing the strain this was putting on their family, Keith made a drastic choice. He gave up his high-paying, travel-heavy job for a desk position closer to home. It was a sacrifice made for family, but one that would mark a dangerous turning point. Keith's pay had dropped dramatically. Financial pressure began to tighten its grip, and he felt trapped in a monotonous job, a position that offered no challenge, no passion. Frustration slowly ate away at him. Meanwhile, Darlene's spending habits hardly changed. She kept the house immaculate, continued hosting gatherings, and still bought things Keith believed they could no longer afford. Arguments increasingly revolved around money, each fight sharper than the last. Keith saw Darlene as careless with finances, and resentment grew as more of the burden of raising their children began to fall on him, and even his own parents. Friends and family noticed the shift. The once happy couple now carried an undercurrent of tension, petty complaints, subtle emotional distance, and a weight that seemed heavier with each passing day. Yet, no one saw signs of divorce. In fact, Keith seemed determined to hold the family together. But everything changed on the morning of November 9th, 2000. At exactly 6:11 a.m., the 911 dispatch center received a chilling call. On the line was Darlene, her voice trembling, broken, describing a horrifying scene inside their home. The back door left wide open, and Keith lying motionless in bed, drenched in blood, gasping for air, pink foam bubbling from his mouth. She added that several of Keith's guns were missing. Darlene insisted she hadn't slept beside her husband that night. Their youngest, just 18 months old, had been fussy, so she carried him into another room where their 2 older boys were sleeping. She claimed she turned on a movie and stayed there until almost dawn. When she woke at 6 a.m., she found the back door ajar, and moments later, the nightmare discovery of her husband, gravely wounded, clinging to life. Paramedics rushed to the Gentry home within minutes of her call. Keith was still alive, but barely. He had been shot point blank in the head. There was no response, only the sickening sight of pink froth escaping his mouth, a sign of devastating, irreversible damage. He was rushed to Hillcrest Baptist Hospital in Waco and placed on life support. But there was no saving him. 2 days later, on November 11, 2005, Keith Gentry was officially pronounced dead. From that moment, the case immediately shifted into a homicide investigation, and all eyes quickly turned to the only person inside the house that night, Darlene. Her statement instantly became the focus. During the first interrogation, Darlene explained. On the night of November 8th, she went out for dinner and drinks with a friend, returning home around 8:30 p.m. But instead of a warm welcome, she was met with Keith's anger. He had just found a restaurant receipt, evidence that Darlene had been spending money again while the family was drowning in debt. The argument escalated, and Darlene claimed that in her frustration, she stormed out, driving aimlessly to cool down. According to her, when she returned later that night, she apologized to Keith, and they tried to move past the fight. Keith went to bed in the master bedroom, while she stayed in another room with their 3 boys, saying the youngest had been fussy and needed comforting. At about 5:15 a.m., Darlene said she briefly woke when the dog barked, but assuming it was nothing, she went back to sleep. Around 6 a.m., she got up and walked across the house to wake Keith for work. Instead of a normal morning, Darlene claimed she found her husband lying motionless in bed, blood soaking the sheets. At the same time, she noticed the back door standing wide open and the gun cabinet pried apart, its weapons missing. The story Darlene painted was chilling. A mysterious intruder breaking in during the night, shooting Keith as he slept, then vanishing into the dark with the guns, leaving no trace behind. But as the investigation unfolded, detectives began spotting dangerous cracks in her account. She insisted she didn't check on Keith until 6 a.m. Yet forensic evidence showed the shooting had taken place much earlier. The bullet trajectory, the pooled blood, and Keith's physical condition all indicated a time of attack far before dawn, almost certainly while he was still asleep. And the crime scene itself raised even more questions. Darlene said multiple guns were missing, yet investigators found several weapons neatly placed just outside the house. That was not the act of a frantic burglar, but of someone staging a scene. Then came the most damning detail. Only 2 people had the keys to the gun cabinet, Keith and Darlene. To access it, someone would have needed to know exactly where the key was hidden and how the home was arranged. It was hard to believe that a random intruder would have that knowledge. Then came Darlene's strange behavior. As a trained nurse, she was fully capable of performing CPR or checking for vital signs. But she did nothing. When paramedics arrived, Darlene didn't help, didn't guide them to the scene. Instead, she stayed in the bedroom with her children, claiming she feared for their safety. Another chilling detail was the 911 call itself. Instead of panicking, Darlene's voice was unnervingly calm. She spoke clearly, methodically, even laying out a detailed timeline of the previous night, as if she were trying to explain away every doubt, rather than sounding like a wife who had just found her husband shot. By the next morning, sitting in the interrogation room, Darlene initially answered questions, but as soon as detectives pressed harder, she hesitated. Without warning, she invoked the Fifth Amendment and asked for a lawyer. The questioning ended instantly. Still, Darlene firmly insisted she was innocent. She claimed she loved Keith and would never do anything to harm him. In her account, she admitted the family faced financial pressure and the strain of raising 3 young boys, but emphasized those were the common struggles of marriage, not enough to ever lead to deadly violence. To the detectives, though, her words couldn't cover the glaring holes in her story. The evidence at the scene suggested a crime that was far more intimate and calculated, nothing like the picture of a random intruder. And as they dug deeper, the questions kept piling up. Who had the motive? Who had access? Who truly had the chance? During interrogations, Darlene sometimes broke down, her voice trembling as she talked about Keith's love for their children and her devotion to her husband. But investigators knew one thing. Tears are not evidence. They needed something more solid. With Darlene's consent, police searched the home. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing like the scenario she described. And most importantly, the Gentry family's .22 caliber handgun was gone. It was the very type of weapon that matched the fatal wound in Keith's body. The motive soon came into focus: a $750,000 life insurance policy, with Darlene listed as the sole beneficiary. For someone facing financial strain, that figure raised a dangerous question about greed. Just 19 days after the shooting, on November 28, 2005, Darlene Gentry was arrested and charged with murder. But her time in custody was brief. Keith's parents, who still trusted their daughter-in-law, put up $50,000 bail to free her. To them, Darlene wasn't just Keith's wife. She was the mother of their grandchildren. Then came a strange twist. While out on bail, Darlene confided in an acquaintance, Robert Pavavella, about buying land near Axtell, Texas, property that had a peaceful pond. She said the water reminded her of Keith's dream to take his boys fishing. But only weeks later, Darlene called Robert again, this time with a chilling request. Could he fill in the pond? The sudden change was unsettling. What had once been described as a memory of Keith's dream was now something she wanted erased. Robert grew suspicious. That odd request nagged at him until he finally contacted authorities. Detectives immediately turned their attention to the pond in Axtell. If Darlene wanted it gone, maybe it was hiding something deadly. A search began. Divers swept the muddy bottom until they discovered a metallic object buried in the silt. It was the missing .22 caliber handgun from the Gentry home, the very weapon that matched Keith's fatal wound. The murder weapon had surfaced, but investigators still needed the irrefutable link, proof tying Darlene directly to that gun. And they had a plan. Use Robert Pavavella once more, this time to set a trap. Pretending to cooperate, Robert called Darlene and told her he planned to fill in the pond, but first had to drain the water. Police believed that if she knew this, she might try to remove the evidence herself, and she did. Undercover surveillance cameras captured Darlene returning to the pond. Wearing boots and carrying a stick, she waded into the water, right to the very spot where the gun had been found. She began poking into the mud, as if making sure nothing incriminating remained. The entire scene was recorded. Direct evidence, undeniable and damning. In February 2007, 32-year-old Darlene Gentry walked into the McLennan County courtroom in Texas. The trial lasted 5 days. In front of the jury, she stood accused of first-degree murder, shooting her husband as he slept in their Robinson home. The prosecution put the full weight of their case on one piece of damning evidence: surveillance footage showing Darlene, days after her arrest, still trying to retrieve the murder weapon from the bottom of a pond. That moment shattered every excuse. The gloves in the trash, the staged burglary, the conflicting timeline, each detail tied together into one picture. Darlene was the killer. Her defense team called no witnesses. They relied solely on cross-examination and procedural arguments. But the truth was too clear, too heavy to deny. On February 8, 2007, the jury delivered its verdict. Darlene Gentry was guilty of first-degree murder. Her sentence, 60 years in prison. Prosecutors argued her motive was both emotional and financial. Darlene wanted out of the marriage. She wanted freedom. And above all, she wanted Keith's $750,000 life insurance policy. In his closing statement, the prosecutor warned the jury, Don't be fooled by appearances. Look at the truth. Today, Darlene Gentry is serving her sentence at the Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. In November 2017, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals rejected her appeal. The sentence stood. Records show she will be eligible for parole in February 2037. If denied, her release date is set for 2067. Though she continues to claim innocence, reality remains harsher than the prison walls. In 2010, permanent custody of her 3 sons, Chase, Cody, and Cade, was awarded to Keith's parents. A strict no-contact order cut off all communication. Since then, Darlene has not spoken to her children. Meanwhile, the memory of Keith Gentry lives on. He was a man of quiet strength, a devoted husband, a father who put family above all else. He left behind 3 young boys, a grieving family, and a legacy etched in love and integrity. Keith is remembered not for the tragedy of his death, but for the way he lived, simply, honestly, and wholeheartedly with his family. So what do you think? Was Darlene Gentry truly a cold-blooded killer, or just a victim of circumstances beyond her control? And does a 60-year sentence truly balance the scales for Keith's death and the pain left behind for his 3 sons? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to uncover more haunting cases, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode.